Okay, cool. Well, hi everyone. I think I know most of you, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Colleen Flaherty, and I actually work for Safe Families for Children, but with Bethany Christian Services, so we share office space here, so I'm here quite a bit. I'm gonna present today about how do we love people in our community. But I'm gonna do a brief introduction of myself just before we get in there. So I actually have been coming to NEC since I think I was like in 6th grade. So it was like the summer of 6th grade we started coming here. So I grew up in youth ministry. It was called at the time Survivor, Not Ignite for middle school, and then Epic for high school. And then I went to Gordon College and I majored in social work. So I graduated in December of 2016 with my BSW, and then when I graduated, I was working at Under Armour and babysitting, doing some side jobs, doing a little bit of everything, and I was getting really frustrated because I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, like post-grad life, you see everyone get a job, and it's just like, you just get really frustrated and you compare yourself to other people. And so I was doing a lot of praying. And eventually I felt like God was telling me, I want you to be content with where you're at. So be content in this retail job with where you're at. Because if you're not content, you're not going to be content with where I take you. So for a while, before I would go into Under Armour, I would pray just for the people there, for the people I work with, for the people I would come in contact with. And I remember one time, one of my managers, her name is Steph. She's actually right here. That's my Under Armour crew. But when I used to work there, and so I used to work in the back, and I worked the freight shift. So we'd open boxes, process new shipment, all that stuff. And it was like 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was just like doing my own thing, open boxes. And she comes over to me. And so just a little bit of background about Steph. So she is gay, and she's also was getting a divorce at the time. So she wasn't really someone that the church would necessarily reach. And so I was barely awake, not really a morning person. And she comes up to me and she says, my friend just sent me this, and it happened to be James 1. It was like trials and tribulations. I don't know what this means. Can you tell me about it? And so it was like this really cool experience, and I was like, oh, hey, wow, that's kind of cool. But so then we started having this like deep theological conversation in the back of Under Armour, and like all my coworkers started pitching in, and it was so cool to see like God present in that job. And then eventually I got a job. I know Julie Payne. Many of you probably know Julie Payne. They helped the Mitchells found NEC. So she got me a job at Safe Families. And then now I work there. So I'll share a little bit about Safe Families later, but I kind of want to start by talking and asking you guys, you feel free to shout out. So when is the church not the church? It's kind of a hard question. Yeah, that's true. It's not just a building. Mm-hmm. And make judgments.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I was going to say when it's a country club, you think it was just like a football
yeah.
club where we all come and hang out together.
Yeah.
As opposed to what Kathy says, reaching out to other people.
Yeah.
I think when
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I think when we don't embrace people who are different than us when they come to the door.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
When the main goal is comfort. Compassion.
I like that. Yeah. So we have, we're going to dive into Matthew 25 for a little bit. So I'm going to read it, and this is kind of lengthy, so bear with me. This might be familiar to a lot of you, but this is this is a passage that we at Safe Families kind of dive into a lot. So it's the final judgment. So when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did to me." And then it continues to say, then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire," very harsh, "prepared by the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. I was naked and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison and you did not visit me." And then they also will answer, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you?" And then he will answer them, saying, "Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So we kind of dive into that. Whatever you do the least of these, we do to me. And even whenever I get like intake calls, and sometimes it's really, really difficult people, that's kind of always in the back of my mind. So I'm going to share a little bit about my program and what I do. So it's called Safe Families for Children. And so I'm going to share kind of about our inception. So it was founded in Chicago in 2002. And Dr. Dave Anderson was our founder, and he was director at Lydia Home. So Bethany Christian Services oversees Safe Families, and so Lydia Home is a very similar organization to Bethany. And so Dave was working there, and a young mom came to him with her 2-year-old son. It was about 5 o'clock on a Friday night, so he was like getting ready to pack up, and this young mom comes through the doors. And she very bravely tells him that, "I have cancer." And his initial reaction was, well, they're actually a foster care agency, and so with foster care, you can't really take kids unless there's been abuse or neglect. So that was his response. There hasn't been abuse or neglect, it's not really much I could do. I'm so sorry. Except this mom was persistent. And so what ended up happening is Dave called his wife, and they ended up taking in this boy for when the mom went in for treatment. And it kind of birthed this idea of, families go through crisis, in our backyard all the time. I get stories of, there's homeless people in Franklin sleeping in their car. But, who is wrapping around them? And so I just want to put yourself in the shoes of that mom. And I know that a lot of you have kids. I personally don't have kids, but I can only imagine, being so desperate, you don't have one person to call on, when you're in that situation, and we see that every day. So it kind of reframes how parents are supported. So parents, it's kind of voluntary on both ends. So parents volunteer, or they voluntarily place their child into a host family, and they maintain custody the whole time, as well as it's voluntary on the volunteers who open up their homes or commit to being a support to that family, like a family friend is what we call them. So it just kind of helps restore the stability of their lives and just give them a break. So we aim to, child abuse prevention is our number one thing. Because, if you think about that situation with that mom, if Dave and Karen said no, who would she have turned to take care of her son? And we've seen pretty desperate people take pretty desperate measures to do what they got to do. So that's what we try to do. We also want to shield kids from the foster care system, because we've just seen really intense and really negative like effects when they grow up in the foster care system. So we aim to equip the church to provide a framework for following God's command to love our neighbor, because I mean, you think about God's two commands are to love your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So people participate on a variety of levels. I kind of touched on it earlier. So we have host families who take in children. We do have some host families who take in a pregnant woman or a mom and a child. Family friends, so like either like babysitting, be a support to that mom. Family coach, that's usually me. We visit on the home once a week if a child is being placed. Or resource friends, so people who donate like diapers, clothes, things like that, for when hosting is going on. So I'm going to share a little bit about, like, there's kind of a crisis among us in terms of the foster care system. And so these stats are actually in 2000. I couldn't find any that are more recent. But just to give you a little bit of background information, so in 2015, over 4 million allegations of child abuse were reported in the U.S. alone. So that's over 7.2 million children. Yeah, so it's a lot. And the number of reports have increased by 15%, 15.5% since 2011. So that's in 4 years. And I can imagine they've only gotten worse, especially with the opioid crisis. So we see more kids in the foster care system. So that those 2 points mean that like a 51A has been filed. So 58.2% of these reports were screened in for assessment. So that means someone went to the home, deemed that there has been like child abuse or neglect. Basically means that it's severe enough where DCF can get involved. And then 41.8 were screened out. So someone came to the home, not severe enough, screened out, no help for you. So out of the 3.4 million children screened in, so 207,000 were put into foster care. So there's millions of children that fall through the system's crack because we're begging to ask, like, what is happening to these 41.8% that are screened out? Because if DCF says, oh, you know, like it's not severe enough for you to get services, where are they going to go? Or like, what's happening to them? So for safe families, we have a 93% rate of returning that child back to their parents. So our goal is always reunification. Well, when they're in the foster care system, it's 51%. And just to give you some stats too, for kids who are in foster care, 40% are going to be homeless. 50% will struggle with drugs or unemployment. 50% will not receive their high school diploma. 60% of males will be convicted of a crime. 75% of women who have early pregnancies, and then 50% will depend on public assistance. So there's so many children, like you think about, like in the Bible, God calls us to love the orphan and the widow, and this is like the modern day orphan. Like there's so many of these kids that go through this world, and they literally have no one, and so the cycle continues. So what we also found too is that a lot of the moms that come to us, like they grew up in the foster care system, and so they don't have a mom they can call. They don't have, the friends that they have aren't really good influence friends. They don't have any family. And they're kind of bridge burners a little bit. So I'm going to transition a little bit to how does this apply to us? So that's a lot of numbers. That's a lot of like very sad situations. So God's 2 greatest commandments, I said this a little bit ago, love God and love our neighbors as ourselves. And so reaching out to the community and loving community isn't easy. God in Genesis 12, he says to Abraham, you got to leave your country and go. And so the way that I kind of think about that is like, you know, you got to drop everything and go. So it's not an easy thing to do by any means. So a lot for our parents that we work with, their biggest problem is social isolation, because again, they don't have anyone to call on. And then if you think about it, the church's biggest resource is community. I know. Yeah. Because that's what we're meant to do. We're meant to have community with each other. And so what Safe Families does is we want to draw on that community and extend that community to people in our backyard who need it. And so I just want to have you think about, like, who are the least of these in your own life? Like, is it a coworker? Is it someone at a grocery store? Maybe it's kind of what Heather was talking about last week with a family member that you're having a really hard time, like having a relationship with, and maybe it's a toxic relationship. But yeah, I mean, it could be anyone. Maybe it's someone. If you drive into Boston or Providence, it's someone panhandling on the side of the road. Like, who are the least of these in your own life? I could talk a little bit about John Townsend. So Heather talked about him last week. So he actually does our trainings. So he wrote Boundaries. If you haven't read it, I very much recommend that you do. I read part of it, and I read the first chapter, and I was like, oh wow, this applies to me. But so I'm going to talk a little bit about Matthew 5. So in Matthew 5, it says, for if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not the Gentiles do the same? And so that kind of says, like if you just love lovable people, is that really love? And like that's like a really challenging thing for me, especially because I think it's really easy to love lovable people. But in one of the videos that John does for us, for one of our trainings, he kind of says, like lovability is kind of irrelevant. It doesn't really matter how lovable they are, because if you think about it, like God loves us every day, despite we fail him pretty much every day. And is that not what the cross was for? So I just love that piece, and I think it's very challenging too, because we think, I can think of several of my clients that are not lovable, to say the least. And I think too that I remember that a lot of them have grown up in the system. They've had some really tough experiences, and just try and give them grace even when they don't deserve it.
Tell us any stories?
Yes. Well, I was going to go to the next slide, but so my boyfriend Tom, I call her Annoying Lady. So she was in our program for 9 months, and like every time I would call him and be like, oh, Annoying Lady did this to me again. But anyway, so she was a bridge burner, to say the least. So she grew up in the foster care system. She was pregnant. She was staying in her car. There would be days that she's told me to F off a few times. Just like a really, really tough egg to crack. And she was staying in a host family, and they were having trouble with her as well. I give them a lot of props. They did not kick her out, even though at times I thought that they would. But, there would be times where I think one time, they had a cat, and she was allergic to the cat, and so she called me. I met with her for an hour and a half. I left. She called me 8 times, and in between I didn't pick up. She would call Donna 8 times. So like it's called me, and then she would call Donna, and then she would and we were literally sitting in the same room, and Donna Peel?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. That's my coworker. Yeah, so she covers Rhode Island, I cover Massachusetts. But anyway, so she would call me, call Donna, call me, it equaled like 16 phone calls altogether. Just like someone who's like exceptionally needy, and towards the end, she actually just phased out of the program maybe a month ago. But I think for me, God taught me a lot with my relationship with her, because again, she grew up in the foster care system. Like, she has probably burned every single bridge that she's had. And I think God always reminded me that, she's never experienced what unconditional love looks like, because she hasn't had it. And so that was a really humbling experience to me, because like there would be some days when I would like drive to go see her, and I'd be like, God, please don't let me smack her in the face. Because there would be several times that I would want to, but I did not, so that's good. But yeah, just like being there for her, and I mean, some of the complaints that she shared with me, I was like, really? Like, this is what we're going to talk about? But regardless, yeah, God taught me a lot through that, because I mean, loving not lovable people is not easy by any means. So,
Can I share a quick story?
sure. Oh, yeah.
I was in the prison ministry for about 4 or 5 years, and I had one woman that came into the class and she says, I need to be here, I need to be here. So there was one week that it ended up she was the only person in my class, and she told me her story. She aged out of the foster care system, but between the ages of 8 to 12, for some ungodly reason, they put her back with her biological father and prostituted her. Okay? So when she finally came in, she says, Cindy, I need to be in church, she knew that she needed to do this. And she told me that she was abused, she was married, and then she told me they got divorced, but she's gay now. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
You know, why would you, after what happened to you?
Yeah.
But after all that happened to her, she turned around and sexually abused her nephew.
Oh.
But that's also
Yeah.
not unusual. But
Yeah.
when we talk about, let's look at this woman, they put a shell around themselves, just a protective shell, because they don't want
Been
to be
so
hurt
hurt.
anymore.
Yeah.
But she finally got to the point, it was in the Boston Globe, she went to court, she says, I accepted responsibility for my crime. And a lot of people don't, they just try to get the system out.
Yeah.
And she pleaded guilty, and she got sentenced for like 15 to 18 years or something, but she said, I want to change my life in that. But it's just, when you finally do get through,
Yeah.
but you still realize that you just peeled back that first layer and you said, okay, beginning to let you in. But there's so much more that needs to be peeled back, and I can just see that, for her, in her instance, and maybe in that woman's instance, that too much has gone under the bridge,
Yeah.
It's just, but it's challenging when you meet people like that. It's also wonderful to see the transformation too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's always is great to see transformation. Do we always see transformation? No. And so that can be a little hard too. But I mean, I think a lot of times I just think about it, as planting seeds, and they might not get to where you want them to be, but I mean, hopefully you planted seeds so that the next chapter of their lives, and maybe they will, and maybe God will put another person in their life to kind of continue that journey that they're on. But yeah. So Bob Goff, I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He also did one of our trainings. So if you haven't read Love Does or Everybody Always, highly recommend. Those are great books. So I love what he says in Love Does. He says, love is never stationary. And so I think a lot of times when we go through our Christian walk, we think, I'm just trying to do better with God and improve my relationship. And we don't think about it that we need to be out in the community and actually put our faith to work. So yeah, I just love that quote. I think it sums up what we do very well. So in order for, we stress this whenever we do trainings with any of our volunteers, that the biggest thing that we offer, especially to parents, are grace-filled relationships. Because, I mean, a lot of times we think, some of the kids that come into our program, sometimes they do have some behavioral issues, usually not a lot, because again, these are volunteers that we place them with, but they come with some baggage. They've usually experienced some trauma, but it's usually not anything outrageous that we couldn't place them with a volunteer. But I think in the back of our minds, we think, it's really easy to love this cute little kid because, they're innocent, they don't know what they're doing, they shouldn't have gone whatever experience that they've already gone through. But it's not very easy to love that parent. At least in our experience, that a lot of volunteers struggle with that because they're like, why would they do this? I don't get it. But we stress to our volunteers that we offer grace-filled relationships to those parents as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what does a grace-filled relationship look like. So the first thing, we want to kind of suspend all judgment and that is very, very hard to do, I know. But I can share a few examples. So what I'm about to say, I think a lot of you will probably be like, really? But, so I've had 2 people tell me this, and so one is a mom up in Lowell, and she has 4 kids, and this was her youngest, and another was a young mom. She's 21, and she had a 2-year-old. And so for the mom in Boston, so her son, she was staying in a homeless shelter. We placed her son for a few months just so she can get back on her feet and work and stuff. And so her son was experiencing some like nightmares. He was 2. And so I called her up because we always want to empower parents and let them know what's like going on with their kids. So I called her up and I was like, so, you know, like he was having some nightmares like the past few nights. I just wanted to see like, you know, like is there something, do you think that's like triggering him? And she's like, well, you know, like last time, so she didn't want her mom to watch him because I guess her mom was a really severe alcoholic. So she's like, well, you know, like my mom watched Chucky with him last week. I know. And so, and then another mom had told me the same thing, that her 3-year-old son was watching Chucky. And I was like, so initially I'm like I'm not a parent, but I'm like, really? Like, really? Like, I mean, just like developmentally, you think like a 2-year-old is not like, you don't know how to, like, that is fiction and that's not real. I know. And so, and then I kind of like, I mean, well, I hope that they never have to watch Chucky and any other scary movies, especially as young as like 2 and 3. But I think to myself, like, they didn't have a mother that shows her, like, this is not okay. And there's been a few times where I've gone over and like done an intake with a mom, and like there was one time, I think last summer, I went to go like meet with her and do an intake, and it was like breakfast time, and she was like feeding her 2-year-old Cheetos for breakfast. And again, initially I was like, really? Cheetos? But again, like she doesn't know how to parent, and that's all she had in her fridge. She's on food stamps, and she was 2, and so whenever she had to go to a grocery store, she Ubered, so she had to put the car seat in the car, take the car seat out, and then go do the same, get all the groceries, call another Uber, stick the car seat in the car. So getting groceries is like kind of a barrier, and that's all she had in the house. And so God has taught me a lot about suspending judgment. So the second thing is meeting people where they're at, and I think it's also like it's physical, like meeting people where they actually are at, but also like where they're at, like faith-wise, emotionally. So I'm going to tell a little story about one of our clients who spoke at our gala last year. She's amazing. I love her. So her story is actually heartbreaking, but she's really out of all the parents, she's probably one of the easiest people to love because she's like unbelievably strong. So she was living in Wisconsin, and she had 5 kids, and her husband was very abusive. So he actually ended up throwing her out of a 2nd-story window. And so she pulled all of her kids after that happened, and she came to Providence because that's where her family was, thinking that her family would be supportive when she came, and they were not. So when she got here, so she had like a really significant laceration on one of her legs, and so when she got here, she went to a doctor's appointment, and they said that they had her leg because it was infected, but she had nowhere for her 5 kids to go. So this is actually before I came, and Donna she's unbelievable. Donna PL, if any of you know her, she's awesome. But so she placed the kids, and so she was in rehab for 12 weeks. And I mean, so whenever we place children, we always want the parent to visit the child. And I mean, she obviously couldn't drive. She was in rehab. And so we had this team of people that went to go get her kids to bring them to rehab to go see her, because there was a barrier there, and we didn't want her to miss out on her kids. So just not only meeting people like physically where they are at, but also faith-wise. So almost none of the people that we come across are Christians, or even just like emotionally are in a good spot. And a few years ago, I think it was like a year ago, we came across this mom, and she had a 9-year-old. I think she's 11 now. She almost was 10, and now she's 11. But So she has gone through a lot of medical challenges where DCF or DCY, because this was Rhode Island, actually took her daughter for a year because she was medically unfit, because she was going through kidney failure, a lot of things. And her daughter, the foster care or the foster home that she was in, the mom had told her one time that she was fat and ugly and that she'd never make anything of herself. And so when she got back with her mom, so they reunified, which was awesome because they don't really do that. This mom was so skeptical of anyone taking care of her kid. Like, no one is gonna come near her. Like, no one is gonna ever say that to her again. So she had a lot of walls up. Turns out though she needed to have surgery. And she found herself in a position again where she didn't have anyone to watch her kids, or her daughter. And so she called us, and again, she had a lot of walls up. And so whenever we place a child, we also want them to meet the host family before the placement happens, just so they can get familiar. We usually do it like a library, or Dunkin' Donuts, or McDonald's, or like a location. But just so that it's not like they're handing their child over to a total stranger. And we kind of try not to make it like foster care as much as we can. So then she met one of our host moms. Her name was Joanne. And so the daughter went with her for a few days while she was recovering from surgery. And this mom called us a week or two later, and she was like, she took her to church. She was so happy, and she's like, can you connect us to this church? And she wasn't like that when we first met her. She was so skeptical of everything. And just, again, like, a lot of these moms have never experienced unconditional love. And so, like, when someone actually and didn't actually say that comment to her child, she was so receptive, and like it's just a totally different person. So we did connect her to a church, and we had people drive her to and from church because she didn't have a car. So meeting people where they're at, like physically and also like emotionally. Forgiveness, that's pretty big. I was gonna share about annoying lady is what I call her at this time, but yeah, I mean, a lot of times it was really hard. Like having her say stuff like the, like, F off, like, I can't, like, what's wrong with you, like, all this stuff, and, like, have her say stuff that are, like, it's, like, hurtful things, and, like, going back and being, like, I forgive you, like, let's move on, like, let's get you to the next spot, like, next step, whatever. So forgiveness is really big. And I also, like, advocate, like, talking to God a lot about it, because I remember in my drives there, I would, it was like an hour drive, and every time I would be dreading it, like, I don't want to see her right now, I don't want to deal with this drama. And just being very honest with God with where I was at, like, God, like, I really don't want to love her right now, I really want to hate her. But yeah, so that was really helpful, because I felt like he stretched me in ways that I wasn't, and like I would be able to, so I could grow where I wouldn't have otherwise. And I think after hearing some of this too, like, I think it's easy to be discouraged and be like, loving people in our community that we don't really know is really hard. And I don't know if I want to do that. They're like, I don't know if I'm equipped to love people that are really difficult. But I think it's really important to know that, like, what God calls us to, he equips us for. So yeah. So then I'm going to go and say kind of the inverse of that. So what do grace-filled relationships not look like? So we go over this in our training. It's called, like, what we call, like, castle mentality. So kind of like my house, my rules kind of a thing. Like, no one can come in. This is, like, my protective barrier from the outside. And so one of our host moms initially had very strict rules. So whenever she would meet, she actually hosts pregnant women, so whenever she would meet pregnant women before she came into the program, she'd be like, this is how you wash the towels, this is how you, like, clean up after yourself, this is where this goes, this is where that goes. You can't put anything out of place. And she didn't really understand that. I mean, these like, women before they were there, like, they were bouncing around. They were couch surfing or sleeping in their car. Like, they didn't really grow up with that much structure, and so not a lot of women thrived in that in that house. We've kind of worked with her to like be a little bit more gracious with some of the rules that she has. But yeah. I think our own prejudices can get in the way as well, because I think we all have them. And it's really hard to like kind of suspend them. But I actually had a story of this mom that I've been kind of walking alongside for a while. And so she grew up in the system. She came to us when she initially was having her 4th kid. A year later, she told us she was having her 5th. They've kind of been on and off homeless. She had a husband with her. They were in they were in a shelter, and then the shelter gave them an apartment, and then they got an apartment, but now they're getting evicted. It's a long story. But anyways, so I had one church, when she first came to us, we had one church wrap around her, and someone actually came to her house, or her apartment at the time, like every once in a while, just to kind of like sit with her and be with her and help her with the kids, because I mean, as you can imagine, and at the time I think she's pretty young. I don't think she's much older than me, and she has 5 kids, and so, and then she fell off the face of the earth, and then she never really contacted that woman again. And then, so a year later when she reached out, I was like, oh, like, can I connect you to this church again? Because, they were a support to you, and, it would be really good to, like, reignite that relationship that you had with that mom that came over. And she's like, no, that woman was actually, like, I felt really, really judged by that church. And she felt like she couldn't go back because she was embarrassed that she was pregnant again, because she didn't really it was kind of an accident. She didn't really mean for it to happen, and she was embarrassed to go back to them. And I just thought to myself, like, how sad is it that, like, this is what the church is supposed to do, regardless of what of how they should feel about, like, her getting pregnant again and having her 5th child at, like, 25. Like, they shouldn't, like, the church should not be turning our back on those in our backyards. So, and then I'm going to talk about having expectations. So this is another thing that we kind of stress to our families and our volunteers in general, because I think a lot of us, we kind of expect, like, when a mom comes to us and, like, maybe homeless and they don't want their child bouncing around with them, and so we expect them to get a job and get a place and get all this stuff done really, really soon, because it's like your child's not with you. I would think that you would be motivated so that you get this done ASAP, kind of a thing, and it doesn't always happen like that. And I remember, I think it was last August, we were dealing with this mom. And she had a 2-year-old daughter, and she was really putting her daughter at risk. She was struggling a lot with alcohol, and she also told me that she was using cocaine. And she'd basically have these parties and have people over her house. And that always makes me nervous, because when you're intoxicated or high, it's not like you're monitoring what is going on with your child. But anyways, so we were like, we need to pull this, or take this child out of the situation ASAP, because it's not a safe place for her to be in. So we called rehab centers for her to go. Donna and myself had called. We called so many places. They didn't have beds. We finally got this place that would take her, like, next week. So it was like, great. Like, we're gonna bring her next week. She's gonna do rehab, like, and she's gonna get better, and she's gonna be the best mom, and, like, all these things. Turns out, I think she lasted, it was 2 weeks. And then she calls us and she's like, I don't really like it. And she left. And initially I was like, are you serious? Like, I just called. We called so many places in Rhode Island to take her so that we could get her the help that she needed, and she wouldn't accept it. And God was reminding me, we can't always control people, and even though we want to be like, what are you doing? But we can't. So yeah. And then, so savior complex. another thing that we also, or like rescue mentality, as another thing that we stress. A lot of people, they come into this like, oh, I really want to help these people. I'm gonna get them back on their feet, and like they kind of almost like make it seem like I'm doing all the hard work and not really giving the glory to God and being. I had actually one host family. They took in this pregnant woman, and they were like, oh, so I'm gonna help her. We never stress people to provide financially, only because it usually ends really bad if they do that, because once they do it once, they expect it all the time. So she's like, she ended up crashing her car, so they're like, I'm gonna buy her a new car, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. And I was like, whoa, like, hold on. And because they want to see like this person succeed because they stayed in their house and like they helped them. And that is always really hard, because again, you kind of take the focus off of like this is God's ministry, and it becomes my ministry. So that's another thing that we try not to have. Like that's not what we stress for our like grace-filled relationships. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we call like the hidden rules of poverty. So I took this from a framework for understanding poverty by Dr. Ruby Payne, and I think this also too helps us understand where people are coming from. So, and there's a lot of different mindsets that people have. And so the first thing, like possessions, and I think people in poverty think like people, and I think and people in middle class things. Money. You would think that, I think initially you would think that people in poverty, if they have any money, that they would want to save it and spend it later, but it's all about the instant gratification. So a lot of them, people that we deal with, are on welfare. So as soon as they get that check, they're like, they spend it. And so it's to be used, spent, and then middle class, it's to be managed. So to save. For food, quantity is for people in poverty. Like, did you get enough? And then for people in the middle class, it's like, did you like it? Time. So a lot of the women that we deal with, they're on like survival mode. So decisions are made in the present. So it's like, again, it's instant gratification. So they might do things that a lot of times we think are very questionable. And then for people in the middle class, it's like we have ramifications, and not, we don't know what that survival mode really looks like. Driving forces for people in poverty, it's survival. Relationships and entertainment, and then for middle class it's like work and achievement. So I think that also really helps me too to help me see like the perspective that a lot of the moms that we work with think about or see through. I'm also going to talk about this because I think a lot of times I wanted to address like that, like how do we love people that like might take advantage. Because this is something that I am still learning, and it's a very hard line to walk. But the difference between helping and enabling. So helping is like things people cannot do for themselves. And enabling is like things people can and should do for themselves. And a lot of times that the people that I work with, there's this, where like they kind of think that, oh, if you can do this for me, maybe you can do this, and this for me. And initially, when I first started this job, I did, because I didn't know any better. And then, yeah, that kind of burnt me out pretty fast. But yeah, I've kind of learned that's a very hard line to walk. And usually when someone asks me a favor, whether it's a ride or like a Market Basket gift card, before I respond to them, because usually it'll either be a voicemail or a text, I'll like take a breather and before I respond yes or no and see, because I don't want to give them 100 Market Basket gift cards if there's a food pantry down the street. I want them to feel self-sufficient enough to do that instead of keep asking me for gift cards. But yeah, I think that's kind of an important lesson, or important thing to learn as well. Yes.
I heard taught one time, if you want to distinguish whether you're helping someone or enabling, the place you have to look is your own part. Because if it's really out for them, you're judging, okay, well, this is really good for them, that's why I'm doing it. Enabling often is best for us.
Yeah.
Like either we have that savior complex you're talking about, or I don't want anybody else to see this. this, so I'm just gonna do this so nobody else sees. You're really looking out for yourself.
Yeah.
When you're enabling, when you're helping someone, you're really looking out for them.
Uh-huh. I also like noticed like too, like there's been a few people that have been like really difficult, and so like when like one of my more difficult clients like would reach out to me like, oh, can you do this for me? A lot of times initially I would do that for her because she was so like she had a very short fuse and she'd be very kind of explosive towards me a little bit, and I would worry that if I didn't do that then she would do that. So that, yeah, but I think that's a good point too, that, you know, we definitely want people to be self-sufficient. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ancient church. And so a big concept that we talk about when we talk about safe families is biblical hospitality. So when the early church was fully alive and engaging culture, like significantly impacting the least of these, there was a practice of offering care to strangers, like hospitality, and it became like kind of a distinguishing characteristic of the church. So it was kind of the most vibrant during the first 5 centuries, and then it kind of provided credibility, so like word and deed, to the distinguished church, and it was kind of like one of the foundational ministries of the church, and kind of a vehicle to spread the gospel. And it's kind of like it's a very deliberate, demanding thing, and it's kind of radical because I think, especially in New England, it's like, my house is my house. Like, we kind of have a very like distant church culture, like your walk is your walk, this is my walk with Jesus, and we don't really engage with other people. And it's a really powerful thing. And so I wanted to just kind of reflect at the end, like, just for you, just kind of a rhetorical question, because also for the sake of time, I know we only have like 10 minutes left. Like, how open do you actively practice hospitality? So yeah, the question I was going to ask. And then, so I also want to ask you, so this is not really meant to be a pressure for you to join Safe Families, and I mean, as much as I would love to have more volunteers, but this is not really meant to do that, more to encourage you to kind of step outside of your comfort zone when it comes to loving your community. So maybe it's like inviting someone over for lunch that you wouldn't normally, or getting involved with your local community, maybe like join a soup kitchen, or like join the prison ministries. There's so many ministries and outreach teams here at NEC to join. Or start like maybe being a support to someone that you know locally that might need it, who might even be like a really hard person to love. And so I also like just wanted to encourage you to think about, like, you know, what is happening beyond our walls, because I know here at NEC, like, we strive to be a blessing, like, within and beyond our walls, but I don't know if we always think about what's beyond our walls. So I kind of want what is happening like beyond our walls? I mean, there's homeless people like sleeping in cars in Franklin. I don't think people readily know that.
People sleeping in the woods in Franklin.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I also kind of want to ask too, like, what if like we as a church like resurrected this practice of like biblical hospitality and compassion and loving our neighbors, and like actually did that? And like, what would that look like if every church did that? It would be so cool. So that was kind of my point to this. So I do have, did you want to say, no?
I'm just thinking, you finished.
No, I was just going to have a little bit of homework for you guys. So who can you show hospitality to this weekend? Maybe it's someone that you want to invite over for lunch. Maybe, you don't have to open your doors to the homeless people. That is not what I'm saying, because obviously I want you to be safe. But just, like, who can you show hospitality to this week, or maybe even just that radical compassion. And then I'm going to end with this quote that I feel like very much sums up what we do. The problem with our world is that we draw the circle of family too small, by Mother Teresa. So yeah, does anyone have any questions for me? I think we have 9 minutes left. No? Yes? No?
My favorite thing that you said was that they were, the biggest need that these parents have is people as community, and the greatest resource that we have is
Community, yeah.
hey, we should like get those two things together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we forget a lot of times how valuable
Mhm.
this is. Yeah. We have each other.
We forget how isolated
Mhm.
we don't see beyond what we see as a, in front of our face.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of isolation.
A lot of what you're talking about too is like the mentality of first responder, where they're walking into trouble, they're walking into what everyone else runs from.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what we're being called to do here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
somebody who's hurtful and mean, you stay away from.
Yeah.
You're saying, no, you approach it. You know, it's very much that same kind of mentality, which is tough.
Mhm.
So it's-
Yeah. I mean, I will definitely say it's not like I don't want anyone to think that like, oh, for toxic people, you just want to like be super involved, where it's like you don't have any boundaries, because sometimes boundaries are more healthy than, like, especially for the person that like you're like engaging with. But yeah.
I think God calls us to a spiritual response to this. A lot of times you talked about maybe getting too emotionally entangled.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing that you can do. And you need to be God-driven and spirit-driven in the way that you minister to people.
Mhm.
You know, from His point of view, you don't want to be taken advantage of, but you also don't want people to be taken advantage of either.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you touch base again on when you talked about the difference between poverty and middle class? You talked about possessions, and are you saying that people in poverty tend to possess people, or middle class tends to possess things? Can you elaborate?
Yes. So I think people more like they don't have a lot of possessions, so they more focus on their like relationships, if that makes sense.
When I was in the prison, you found that the people in there had very unhealthy relationships with people, and that they just clung to them.
Yeah.
They didn't have stuff.
Yeah.
So they would stick out, you know, they might attach themselves to somebody that
Mhm.
abusing them or whatever, but they
Mhm.
felt like, you know,
Yeah.
they get a benefit in some perverse way from
Mhm.
having those people in their lives, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of almost like, I shouldn't say almost every, but a lot of moms like that I've worked with have either like experienced an abusive relationship or are still in one. And I think what it is, it comes down to a lot of them are like so desperate to be loved that like one guy like gives them like an ounce of support and they're like, okay, this is good enough for me, and it doesn't matter what else they do, which is so sad. But
Yeah, so I was thinking that's true in the negative, so that could be a hotbed for a lot of abusive relationships because they're holding on to
Mhm.
them longer than they should because that's all they have. But I'm also thinking, if you look throughout church history, and I hate to say this, but it seems like the church grows when it's under persecution.
Mhm.
Now, why is that? That doesn't make sense. Well, maybe because when they're in dire straits, you start to really value your relationships, and that's
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what grows. But when
Yeah.
we just have, we're comfortable in our things and our possessions, like our homes.
Yeah.
We don't grow because we're stagnant. We're stationary.
Uh-huh.
Speaking as somebody from the Appalachian culture, which is largely impoverished, the sense of family is really strong. The sense of community is really strong. Where, you know, my dad was raised by his parents partly, but also partly by the community. Other people in the community helped raise my father, and you know they had close enough relationships with each other where that was possible.
I was gonna say, having worked in education, our health careers, kids will stay with a friend just to have a friend.
Mhm.
A horrible friend, it's not a good friend, but it's better to have that person than to have nothing.
Mhm.
And I think and they can be middle class, it's just
Mhm.
the situation, just like these mothers who cling to these men that are probably bad for them. I mean, we all do that. I mean,
Mhm.
kids at school will cling to the worst person for them. But you wanna sit alone at the lunch table?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's universal.
Yeah. It is everywhere. Anything else? Yes.
Is there anything that's, it strikes me that your working with mothers
Mhm.
and children,
Mhm.
and a lot of it makes a lot of sense. Is there anything even more systemic that's being done to help fathers that would I think it probably goes much deeper,
Mhm.
but it just strikes me that if our culture is going to turn around in this area, that's a huge area that needs a lot of help.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that we do have some fathers that come to us and that are placing a family unit, I guess, so like a mom and a dad. I just say that mothers usually, because like mothers are like the 90% of people that we serve, but I mean we do serve fathers as well. I know, I mean there are some services for fathers, and we don't turn away fathers by any means, but it's just what we experience. I'm trying to think of off the top of my head. I mean, it is usually moms and kids, but yeah, I mean, we definitely do support dads.
That should be changing.
Mhm.
There are a lot more men that are taking over.
Yeah.
And being more the better parent.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely have seen some dads that have stepped up more than the moms. More recently, there was a placement in Framingham, and the dad was a lot more engaged than the mom was, and he would come and visit the baby like literally every week, and the mom wouldn't. But yeah, I mean, we definitely, like when we place a child, we have to get both parents' signatures if they both share custody. So like we try and engage both. But yeah.